want our moderator, another one of our outstanding students, to kick off this session as it should be. And let me tell you something particularly important about Tuskegee University. We have a really, really strong engineering program. Really, really strong. Aerospace engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, all of those phases of engineering. And the students that are most involved in bioethics activities are engineers. And that's unusual. Because if you ever work with engineers, you know they're special. Things are black and white. Ain't no gray shades. It's either this or it's not. But we've got students who are engaging in ethical domains and dimensions and spheres, so they'll be able to understand how they can do the right and wrong and how to correct it as they reshape and construct the world. Tiareah Jakes is one of those engineering students, and I'll let her tell you a little bit about herself, but please welcome her to the podium. Tiareah.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I am Tiareah Jakes. I'm Tiareah Jakes. I'm a junior electrical engineer major with a minor in bioethics honors. I'm the president of the Bioethics Honors Program, and I would like to thank you all for attending this session this morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you, and the speakers for this session will be Ms. Attorney Crystal James, and she is the keynote speaker. Attorney James received her Bachelor of Science degree from Clark Atlanta University, her Master of Public Health from Roland School of Public Health at Emory University, her Juris Doctorate from the University of Houston, and her license to practice law from the state of Georgia, all by the age of 26. Congratulations. She has been able to not only work within her science and public health interests, she has also maintained successful legal practice that focuses mainly on the areas of civil rights issues, which include her labor and employment issues, criminal law, personal jury, as well as domestic relations. With more than 16 years of private practice experience in offices in Atlanta, Georgia, and Osceola, Georgia, Attorney James continues to seek opportunities to utilize her unique training and background to assist the clients that she serves and enrich the experience of students seeking careers in public health. Dr. Otis Head earned his Master's of Divinity and Interdenominational Theology Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and his Doctorate of Philosophy in Christian Counseling from the Restoration Theological Seminary in Atlanta, Georgia. His professional career includes services as a social worker, director of community and detention juvenile centers, warden of adult correctional facility, program director of a juvenile detention center, director of a nonprofit family ministry, and director of counseling ministry of a megachurch. Presently, he is a visiting scholar of the National Center of Bioethics Research and Health at Tuskegee University as a project director of the Tuskegee University and Macon County Bridge Builders Program. Dr. Head is also contracted with the Macon County Board of Education as a program coordinator, formerly president of the Macon County Ministers Council. His work is dedicated to the community of Macon County and their sacred development. Our next speaker is our very own Tuskegee alumni, Ms. Dorothy Baker. Ms. Dorothy L. Baker is currently an ambassador with the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. She is the founder of the James Macaulay Home and paternal grandfather of the mother of the Civil Rights Movement in America, Ms. Rosia L. Macaulay Parks. Ms. Baker practiced clinical social work with Ms. Parks. Ms. Baker practiced clinical social work for 30 years, providing mental health, outpatient and inpatient services in Atlanta. And patient services to children, families, and individuals in state and private mental health service organizations for more than 15 years. She also served as a manager and supervisor in mental health service administration. She has been a mental health consultant with the Phoebe Putney Hospital in Albany, Georgia, and Cambridge Hospital in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She earned her bachelor's degree in sociology from Tuskegee Institute and was awarded a mental health stipend from the National Institute of Health to pursue her master's degree in social work. education from the Portland State University. Now we have our keynote speaker, Attorney Jakes.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning.
It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to be on this stage with such distinguished speakers, and I hope that I will give them something to respond to that is a little bit more than the lens that I generally seek to look through. As an attorney, and as most people in our disciplines, when I look at a problem, I see it as a legal problem because that's what I generally focus on. And so I focus on that area in a lot of ways, but I'm gonna make an attempt in this presentation to also bring my family narrative into it to demonstrate that what we tend to think about when we think of family, gang, and prison, that social science and history, well, popular media don't always get it right when it looks at where these folks come from when they end up in gangs and prisons. Now, again, my lens is a legal one, but it's also from rural Georgia in a town smaller than Tuskegee, where most of the people in that town are my family members. And so my connections get it right. Make me look at this problem not as linear, but a little bit more like this, of all these things touching together. And I put black males in the center of the diagram at this point in the presentation, but as you'll see, it encompasses way more than that, and that problem in our community is not just with black males. But what's important about this particular graph is that they all touch and they all interact. As a matter of fact, in survey conducted in 2001 by Lawrence Bobo and Victor Thompson, 1 in 10 whites reported having a close friend or relative who was incarcerated. By comparison, half of African Americans have a friend or a relative in prison. Class is also an important factor in that among high school dropouts with incomes below $25,000 per year, 1 in 5 whites and nearly 3 in 5 blacks had a close relationship with someone behind bars. At higher class positions among college-educated respondents making at least $60,000 per year, less than 5% of whites were tied to someone in prison. Among comparable African Americans, 1 in 3 had a friend or relative in prison. While the higher end of the class hierarchy has less exposure to incarcerated population in general, the impact of racialized mass incarceration reaches across boundaries of class in Black America. In fact, the highest status African Americans were substantially more likely to have a close friend or relative in prison than whites of much lower class positions. And again, to put myself in this narrative, these councilmen and gentlemen, these are all my family members. And my uncles are there, and these 2 are my brothers, and these all are my first cousins. And I'm gonna focus for a moment on my uncle, whose firstborn son is pictured there. This is my family's get-together about 2 years ago in Louisiana so that we could visit him, who has been incarcerated since the age of 17 because of gang-affiliated violent homicide, wherein we don't know whether or not he actually pulled the trigger because of the code of silence within gangs. It did not matter. It was decided that he was the person that was going to take the fall for this particular incident, and that's what happened, and that cone of silence has not been broken. So how does this little sweet boy turn into this face by the age of 19? He had a father who went into the military, was gainfully employed, mother who was actively involved in his life, grandparents, aunts and uncles, a very strong connection of people to call on. He wasn't hungry, he wasn't in the street. He did not have to participate in a gang in order to get those social networks or those connections that a lot of people affiliate persons associated with gangs to jump into gangs or join gangs to get. He had all of that in my family. So, in this model, was it lack of jobs? Was it the expectation in the media for him to show his manhood by participating in a certain way? And as Dr. Davis talked to us about on yesterday, his wanting to exhibit his malehood in a way that would distinguish him in his community? We don't know. Those questions are still ones that are being studied much in social science, but also it's something that we still struggle with as a family. Because out of all the young men you saw in that first picture, Jay, the one that ended up incarcerated by the age of 17, was the sweetest one. He was the nice guy. But when he moved away from the small town that we grew up in and moved back to New Orleans, he had to assimilate into a different community. And he had to learn how to make community in that space. And something about that community, that change in environment, encouraged his involvement with the gangs that were in his neighborhood. He was in school, he was not in the foster system. He didn't have a criminal juvenile record. None of those things that are considered to be predictors or risk factors, if you will, for gang affiliation. None of those things applied to him. But yet, before he could even reach the age of majority or vote, he has been incarcerated for life. So let's take a look at family. We talked about this in depth yesterday, and the conversation actually had me to add another bullet to my presentation. And what you see there is essentially the first definition that you'll find if you Google family is a group of individuals living under one roof and usually under one head. So that nuclear family that she was talking about, mother, father, children. But it also can be extended to a group of persons of common ancestry. That's family too. We talked about how we have different ways of creating family within the extended family. But also persons of common affiliation, our Tuskegee family, our Macon County family. All those are families, networks that come with supports, but also that come with expectations for you to play a particular role in that family and for you to fulfill certain obligations of that family. And the reason why I want to spend some time with some definitions here today is that because of my lens as an attorney and spending 2 weeks in law school defining what is a chicken, we really did 2 weeks in contracts defining what is a chicken. And it just played into the idea that when I say family, it means something different to everyone. So I want to try to bring us all to a common place by defining some of these terms, understanding that you may define them differently, but so that when you know that I refer to family, I'm referring to these types of networks. Now, so if you Google gang, the first definition you'll come up with is a group of persons working to unlawful and antisocial ends, especially a band of antisocial adolescents. Under that definition, my daughter's martial art class will fit. They've been taught to use violence to protect or engage other individuals, they're adolescents, they all affiliate, they wear the same colors, and they hang out. Definitions are important. Federal definition of gang: an association of 3 or more individuals whose members collectively identify themselves by adopting a group identity which they use to create an atmosphere of fear or intimidation, frequently by employing one or more of the following: a common name, a slogan, identifying sign, symbol, tattoo, physical marking, style of clothing, hairstyle. Purpose is to engage in criminal activity which uses violence or intimidation to further its criminal objectives. Whose members engage in criminal activity or acts of juvenile delinquency. Under that definition, my grandfather, who was in World War II, trained to kill and intimidate the enemy, could fit in that very broad definition of gang. He had affiliations, they dressed alike, they walked together, they carried guns. They would fit under that federal definition of gang. Now, in the state of Georgia, to bring it a little bit closer to home, a criminal street gang means any ongoing organization, association, or group of 3 or more persons, whether formal or informal, having one of its primary activities the commission of one or more criminal acts. Having a common name and common identifying sign or symbol whose members individually or collectively engage in or have engaged in a pattern of criminal gang activity. This is a picture of my sorority sisters singing the Sweetheart song on Clark Atlanta University's campus. According to that definition, hazing is illegal in the state of Georgia. And not saying that my sorors conspired to haze, but under the definition of hazing, anytime you ask someone to do something that they don't want to do and they do it anyway, that's considered hazing. And every time I go to homecoming, I'm asked to do something I don't want to do by a big sister. And I do it because she's my big sister. So under that definition, this group of women could be considered a gang. Now, we talked a little bit about gang affiliations and what the accepted, or what we have accepted as the risk factors of why people enter gangs: missing fatherhood, fathers and households, involvement in a criminal enterprise, protection from victimization in neighborhoods. Now, that third bullet is a risk factor that I think is very significant in our community. Is in some of our neighborhoods, especially in urban centers, if you're not a part of a gang, you are a target of the gang. So in order to protect yourself or your family, you affiliate so that you are not victimized. And that still very much happens in some urban centers. So not to say that none of these risk factors and some of these are not significant reasons why people join gangs. It is, of course, not an exhaustive list. There are a myriad of reasons of why they do it. But once affiliated, that gang is a family. They fit the definition that we talked about earlier. They have common goals. They usually are under the leadership of 1 or 2 heads, and they follow that the direction of that leadership towards the end, whatever that enterprise may be. Now, if you Google society, it's considered people in general thought as living together in organized communities with shared laws, traditions, and values, a voluntary association of individuals for common ends, especially an organized group working together or periodically meeting because of common interests, beliefs, or profession. Dangerously close to the definition of a gang, but that's how we define society. And the distinction that we have to make is, in the law, it has been prescribed that certain activities separate this society from gangs and how those affiliations work together and what their ends are. Now, there was a series on HBO called The Wire. I loved it. I recorded it. I have it. I've used it to teach classes. My brother, has a degree in cultural studies. He uses it. It did a very good job of depicting the different systems that work together in order to create the environments for not only gang affiliation, but for other criminal enterprises. And so we're going to use some of the information from The Wire in this presentation to illustrate how, what I believe, because as an attorney or as a public health trained attorney, what I like to study is systems and organizations and institutions and how they work together. And because to do the law and to practice it adequately, you have to know what are the constraints and the rules of the system that you're working in. And that system is different in rural Georgia than Fulton County, Georgia. Fulton County is different than Douglas County, Georgia. So just knowing the law or the rules of the state may not be all that you need to understand when you are engaging a system in different parts of the state. And The Wire does a really good job of showing inside of Baltimore how those systems conspire together to create an atmosphere for the violence that is perpetrated throughout the show. Now, I'm gonna skip through a lot of these because I was just told I got 5 minutes. Now, the whole idea of gangs and families, in this picture here is surround yourself with those who are on the same mission as you. And by our definition, this could be a gang as well. They have a similar focus, they got a leader, and they're gonna follow and attack based upon the directions of that leadership. So how does that lead us to prison? What does that do to our community? We have, you know, as way of definition, prison, of course, is a place of confinement, especially for lawbreakers. There are different types of prison institutions, and a system that is created to lead people to this system has been perpetrated in our society consistently for the last 4 to 5 decades. Societal shifts, such as in the 70s, deindustrialization, when all of the industry jobs moved out of the inner cities. Four of the largest cities in America accounted for 1/4 of the central city poor, losing more than 1 million jobs in manufacturing, wholesale, and retail enterprises. The shift in economy to white-collar service industry jobs required education. So it institutionalized job requirements, which in effect eliminated the ability for many to actually be able to get a job. And we all know now that you can't even get a job at McDonald's without a GED. So if you don't finish high school, then even the most rudimentary jobs in your community are unavailable to you. So the deterioration of these urban neighborhoods was marked by, in the post-civil rights areas, marked by a dramatic class differentiation within the Black community. In the 70s, the percentage of Black families earning more than $75,000 per year was 4%. By 1998, the number tripled to 12%. In addition, the percentage of Black who earned a bachelor's degree in 1970 was 6.1%. By 1994, the percentage of Black who earned bachelor's degrees was 16.1%. While the quality of life for middle-class Blacks has dramatically improved, they have worsened dramatically for the Black working poor. The percentage of Black families earning less than $10,000 per year grew from 17% in 1980 to 20% in 1990. Similarly, 1/3 of all Blacks living below the poverty line in 1980. By 1992, that increased to nearly 35%. So what systems were working to perpetuate these dramatic declines in the availability of resource? The loss of jobs was not an exclusive problem for Black workers. They were hit by the factories closing, but you also had something else that was happening at the same time. In 2004, 72% of Black male high school dropouts in their 20s were jobless. By their 30s, 6 out of those 10 had been incarcerated. So if they're not in school, they're not going to get a job. So by the time they reach their 30s, 60% of them will be incarcerated. The unintended impacts is once you're a felon, all the old forms of discrimination become legal. all the things that we fought for in the civil rights movement to be able to have access to, it becomes legal to discriminate against you based upon your felony status. So from 2008 to 2011, black youth ages 16 to 24 consistently had the highest unemployment rates in the United States. 25 to 31% during this time period, with a 49.1% peak in 2009. Without access to mainstream economies, alternative economic streams were utilized, termed underground employment, usually involving criminal activity. Now, in the literature, you start to see social scientists to investigate things as youth crime as work. It's when you talk to these young people on the street, or I see them in a jail, they usually say, you know, I was just putting in work. That's what I had to do to feed my family. And their definition of work was committing a crime. And many times, the leaders of the gangs use the juveniles to commit these crimes because they could say, well, you're gonna go to the juvie system, that's a much more lenient system. And they're in extreme poverty, they're not in school, they need to have some access to sometimes just eat. And so they're left with this as a proposition of, because you have the people in that community that are looking as if they are doing well. And so they start to build a reputation by being a part of that. I'm gonna skip some of this. Now, I wanted to get to this section before I stop and let my responders, because I'm running way over time. The war on drugs was initiated by President Reagan in 1982. It was espoused to be the response to the crisis caused by crack cocaine. However, in 1985, the Reagan administration hired staff to publicize the emergence of crack cocaine as a part of a strategic effort to build public and legislative support for its war on drugs. In less than 30 years, the U.S. penal population exploded from 300,000 to more than 2 million, with drug convictions accounting for the majority of that increase. And most of those that were involved in those crimes were low-level street dealers that were nonviolent. And one of the things that Attorney Holder did as Attorney General, he did a lot in that system to try to turn back and to eliminate the differential in the amount of time you receive for crack cocaine and powder cocaine, so that the disproportionate number of people that are being arrested and incarcerated for these types of crimes will no longer just look like us. I'm going to skip over some of the gang-related legislation detail, but I put this here to let you know that along with the war on crime, states started to also legislate specifically to address gang activity. And as I was speaking with the gentleman yesterday, when you try to legislate for a specific activity, you always end up with bad law. And what it does and how it continues to plague our young men today is that it allows them to give mandatory increased sentences because you are associated with the gang or believed to be associated with the gang. And it puts you in a criminal database, which allows you forever. Once you're in this database, you do not come out. So even if you leave your community, go to college, and happen to just come back home and be visiting your mom, someone breaks into the house and you defend your mother, you can be incarcerated. And then your sentence increased exponentially because you're in the gang database. You're always considered gang affiliated, and your crime is always going to be considered a part of a gang affiliated crime. So these are the types of things that legislatures have done in every state to create databases of persons that are believed to be affiliated. And again, you never can leave that system. You're never considered to be able to earn your way out of that affiliation, such that any crime that you may commit, whereas anyone who's not in that system may get a slap on the wrist, you will get a mandatory 5 to 10. Are schools a risk factor or a protective factor? I wanted to just close with this part, and I'll end here. I have a young sorority sister who started to teach in the inner cities of New Jersey, where she grew up, and she went to Strawberry Mansion High School. Was the only person from her class to actually go to college, the only. So she is the success story. She went back to her community, is now teaching in a charter system. And as we talked about charter systems as being a good alternative to failing urban schools, in her charter system, she contacted me because she wanted to figure out how she can work to try to change what she feels like is a failure of her charter school to actually prepare these students. What they are required, she said, basically we're teaching them compliance. We're teaching them preparing them to go to incarceration. We are teaching them to submit to rules where they have to pass through metal detectors to get in, and they have to abide by strict transitioning rules in their classroom. They only can walk on the right side of the hallway. They only can go to all the bathrooms are locked, and they only can go during their lunch period. If they have to go other than that, they cannot go alone. A runner has to come to their classroom with a key, escort them to the bathroom, and bring them back. And they actually know what they call liberty if they have any misbehavior or if their uniform is not proper. They will be put in what's called general population lunch, as opposed to lunch for students who can follow the rules, where they can actually talk freely with their friends and choose their lunch. If they go to gym pop lunch, they cannot speak. They are not allowed to move once they are escorted into the room. This is high school, ladies and gentlemen. They're not being taught math and reading. They're being taught complacency, how to comply, and how to follow the rules. And this is part of the slideshow that as teachers they're given so that they know how to instruct their students how to transition in a hallway, how to behave in a classroom, when they can go to a restroom. And teachers are actually penalized if they do not force their students to follow these transitioning rules. This is a charter school actively doing this right now to our children in inner cities. So, preparing them for prison life. You want to talk about a pipeline? These kids, and when she asked why was this important, she was like, most of these kids are never gonna leave this community unless they go to jail. They need to learn how to comply with the rules for the system that they're gonna be in, probably for the rest of their life. So that's what they're being prepared for. And that's what our pipeline looks like. And as all the different systems that we talked about, the legal system, some of the community systems through gangs, and even our schools are preparing our children, have given up on them and said that we're preparing them for this life. And that's their only survival method. So, as my grandma would say, my job this morning was to stir the pot. And my respondents here who have been working with this population and hopefully have the answers, are some answers that we can consider. But what I can tell you is that, as Dr. Davis was indicating on yesterday, this problem is huge, and if we look at it from a macro level, it seems very daunting. But in my own family, that group of men that you saw at the beginning, my grandfather, before he passed away, mandated that the men of the family shall meet once a year and go on retreat and talk about what they're gonna do to make sure the family stays together and that we don't lose another one. And they have to do that every year. So that's what my family is doing to try to move this issue. And it will take all of us making our individual efforts and trying to build collective efforts to deal with this problem. Thank you.
Now we will have our first respondent, Dr. Otis Head.
I'll block it out.
Good morning. Good morning. I greet you this morning in the name of my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And I come this morning, as I just whispered to Attorney James, under no pressure. When she said they've been working in the system, they might have some answers. I feel no pressure. I want to first and foremost thank God for the opportunity to come before you. I want to thank my wife, Minister Sarah Head. Please wave your hand, let everybody know who she is in case you don't know her, who completes me. I want to thank Dr. Warren and my colleagues at the Bioethics Center, Attorney James and Ms. Baker and Ms. Jakes for allowing me to sit among them this morning. I want to thank my family, my gangs, and even thank my prison experience for what I'm about to do this morning. I want to do a disclaimer first and foremost to let you know that I don't even feel qualified to stand here in the qualifications and the strength that I have. But there's a strength that is provided through my head that allows me to do all things, that allows me to understand things that we don't necessarily even want to understand, that allows me to see things even differently than what the statistics and the data and the information that is given says. It allows me to walk even when I used to hop and I used to crawl and I didn't want to face what we're facing. But we're here. And I want you to understand and I want you to realize that what I'm about to say to you is not me, because you don't need to hear me. But you need to hear a supreme being that's higher than me, that uses me for the opportunity to tell you, with all of this, we still have hope. We still have a future. This is not the end. This is the beginning. And for those of you who are feeling a little struggle right now, don't get it confused. We're all struggling. So I took the opportunity to take our theme for this course, Healing Our Families, and kind of paraphrase it into what I believe that my assignment is for us this morning. And that's to heal us, to help us in this process of healing. And I'm going to do that by looking at, without any slides, without any other presentation, so you don't have any other choice but to look at me. Okay? Don't go to sleep, because then I'll be forced to call the church into a song. And then even more so, I will be forced to call the ushers up for an offering that will clearly wake you up this morning, because you don't think that's the environment that you're in. But I want you to understand, and I want you to realize that even with the issues that we deal with family, gangs, and prison, there's still hope. There's still a divine presence that we need in every situation to understand where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And I like to do that by doing a case study as such. And the focus of my case study is me. Because I can't tell a story any clearer than me. I know me. And I've learned that there's only one individual who knows me better. And I've got to be able to hear him before I can expect him to hear me. I've got to be able to hear him before I expect him to hear me. So I want to tell you just a brief moment. I'm a head. That's literally. I was born into a family in Griffin, Georgia, 40 miles south of Atlanta, 40 miles above Macon, Georgia. And that allowed a connection that occurred because it was clear to me, it was made clear to me from day one, as much as I can remember. It was made clear to me to the point where I understood that when I walked out of that house, I was no longer an individual. I was a head. And with that title came responsibilities, because the head family was very much a respected family in our community, in our state. We were known to be business owners. We were known to be successful. We were known to be educated. We were known to have a history of doing the right thing. You don't know how crushed I was when the people who felt that it was their job to tell me the other story that I didn't want to hear about the heads and where it took me to as far as my emotional bondage was concerned. In other words, we were taken to heights of expectation, then put into a bondage of responsibility that I struggling with, continue to live up to that expectation. So I looked for relief. And that relief came in joining gangs. That relief came in being associated with people of the same culture, of the same nature, of things that I believe. From my family experience, the first gang that I came involved with was called Catholicism. It was the religion of my mother. And we happened to be the only black family in that community who were black. So we had to affiliate with a church, with a system that we didn't fit the criteria for, but we were accepted because they were supposed to be a religious institution. That was my first gang association. They didn't teach me to hurt nobody. They didn't teach me to to kill people, but they did teach me if I didn't do the right thing, that I was going to die and go to hell. So when they taught me that I couldn't eat meat on Friday, and I slipped up one day and forgot about Friday and ate a hot dog, I cried like a baby because I thought I was going to die and go to hell. That's how much influence that gang had over me. Then my second gang that I associated with was my peers. And in a small town where you only have one high school, it's difficult to select those individuals who you think and you feel are the ones that you're supposed to hang with, are the ones that you're supposed to be with, are the ones that you want to be around. So my peers were those individuals who were telling me that I came from the other side of the track. I came from that side of the track that was influential, that was wealthy, that was blessed beyond their expectations. So it was hard for me to fit into that gang, but they accepted me because there was a class system that we accepted, that we go to school together, so we might as well hang together. The problem with the hanging together was that we were pitted against the people that were in the class above us. And I happened to have a sister who was in that class. So when we had confrontations at ball games, at different dances, at different places, we had confrontations, and I had to deal with the fact that my confrontations also indeed allowed me or put me in a position that pitted me against my family. Daddy resolved a lot of that. I didn't need the police. He took care of that situation. And I thank God for him today, that he took care of that situation. My third gang, moving right along, is a gang that my friend and my brother announced on yesterday, that godly fraternity called Omega Psi-Phi. And I can't go too much into deep details with that, but I can certainly tell you that God is a merciful God. God is a forgiving God. God is a restoring God. Can I get a good amen from those of you who understand what I'm saying to you? He is good. You know, because when we got associated, as Attorney Jane mentioned, with our fraternities even, there were situations that we were put into that we had to understand. But I'm so glad that God watches over us, even in what you might consider our foolish moments, but I consider it a growing, developing process that I needed, that I had to have, that I was taken in and accepted and could identify and still identify with those brothers who call themselves Omegas. Then the prison issue. And I wish I had time to stand here and tell you the prison issue. But let me sum it up by saying, as my best friend told me, who had to deal with incarceration because he got caught up in that system. When I asked him, man, how in the world did you deal with that? He told me, he said, oh, as they call me, you need to try the other side of that desk. Because what I experienced in the 17 years that I stayed in prison as a warden, not as an inmate, what I experienced is that system is the goal of the system where we live in to get you there so they can tear you down, so they can totally take away your identity, so they can make sure that you don't have an opportunity to express who you are and whose you are. So if you don't hear anything else I say this morning, please hear this. We have the responsibility to let our young people understand, don't go there. Don't get involved in the criminal justice system. Don't allow them to take away your identity and make you not even a human being. I like the way that Attorney James said, it's a system that does not allow you to be you. But all of the discriminatory laws that were outlawed are practiced in the prison. They're practiced in the prison. And when it becomes your life, when it becomes your livelihood, and when it becomes your daily living, it can tear you down. It can tear you down to the point where, God, please, either let me out or kill me. So they choose sometimes to take that route that is the most easiest route that we can take. I can't deal with this, get me out. So I can't get out, so I'm gonna try and get out on my own. And then that gives us the ability to say they tried to escape and we killed them. That's the system. That's the system. So what are you saying? What are you trying to get us to understand? What are you trying to tell us through this experience of family, gangs, and prison? We're in a situation today where God is saying no more, where God is allowing us to understand and realize we can't do this by ourselves. There is no answer to those issues that we have put before you today as far as family, gangs, and prison. Everybody has a story. And if you were here, you could tell yours. But why I tell mine is because of the fact that on the day that I realized that I can't do this by myself, I've tried to find help in every way that I know. I've gotten an education. I've done this. I'm supposed to be this. I'm supposed to do that. I fell down on my knees and I said, God, I can't take this no more. And that's when I heard him say, good. I've been sitting over here waiting on you to give up. I've been sitting over here waiting to hear you say you can't, because I can. And when I connected with God, when I changed from that correctional system to the ministry and start to understand all the things that occur to you, to me, to my family, to my gangs, and yes, even to those inmates. And one of the things that I failed to mention as we talked about the prison system, one of the most intelligent individuals that I met in my whole life were in those prisons. The creativity, the ability to make things happen, the ability to understand where they were and what was going on in their lives was found in that prison. Unfortunately, they were there and they had to accept it. There was nothing else for them to do, because if they tried to fight against it, they died. So what are we saying again? What we're saying is that the responsibility that God is giving us is to share our stories, is to let people know this family, these gangs, will ultimately lead you into this position of being in prison. We've got to accept our past. You know, we talked about yesterday going back through our heritage. We've got to understand where we've come from. We've got to understand what has happened to us. We were enslaved. But let me just help you. There's some of us that are still enslaved. We were, and there was a public health syphilis study that totally was wrong in the 623 men that they affected, that they hurt, that they insulted. And that's why I have so much respect for the descendants of this program, because I understand, I realize, because of my disappointment with my families, to understand that when they were telling me how good we were, we really ain't all that. And it wasn't, as I said Monday night as we first started this discussion, it wasn't a issue of ignorance. It wasn't an issue of being uneducated. There was an issue of understanding that's the position and that's the place that God had put them in. And to heal, we've got to understand we are not victims. We are victors. We're not people who can sit here and lean back and say, we've been so mistreated, we've been so hurt, we've been so put down, we can't move no further. Because I'm here to tell you, if you accept your past, if you accept the changes that need to occur, if you accept the transition that is being put forth today, to accept the identity, to accept how to love, to accept how to be intimate, to accept how to look at people who hurt you and say, I love you, to accept how we pray for people that continuously try and tear us down, to accept the position that God has placed us in today, to say, I got a future for you. But in order to understand where we're going, we've got to understand where we are. And where we are right now is it's time for us to jump into the pool. See, in the story that is told so biblically, that is true, is that the man sat by the pool and he waited. And he stood there and he waited. And he waited. And he waited for somebody to come and put him in the pool. My brothers and sisters, I want you to hear me and hear me clearly as I take my seat. We got to jump in. We can't wait for nobody to do it for us. This political system that we are experiencing as we began and we start to look at who's going to be our next president of these United States, we need to understand, as it was taught on yesterday, that we have some other issues that we got to be concerned about too. Who's going to be our next mayor? Who's going to be our next representative? Who's going to be our next governor? Who's going to be this? Who are we going to lead? Who are we going to follow? Who's talking what we need to hear right now? And the biggest part of all of that is to get to the point where you can accept change. Change is difficult, especially when you have a family that has taught you, this is how we do it. This is the way that we do it. When you have an educational system that teaches you, this is how we do it. This is what we do. When you have definitions that you are to accept as this is what is right, this is the correct definition, we've got to have the courage, the strength, and the ability to say, you might try and put me into that category, but I'm not going to accept it, because my internal strength allows me to understand, though it might be difficult, I'm ready to take on the enemy who is already defeated, who has to understand we have the victory. So stop being victims and be the victors. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Head. Now we have our second respondent, Ms. Dorothy Baker.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Who's the Oh, she won't need it. Thank you. Okay. She just wants to play a clip. This internet is very slow. Tiara, can you hold the mic?
Can do.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You want to hold the mic?
Ladies and gentlemen, the internet is slow, so I'm going to do a clip, but technology had us slow up.
It's coming. Okay. It's so slow. Gosh, it's not responding. No.
It's okay, I'll just take it.
Yeah, you can just talk about it. Wait, it's coming. It's coming. Tiara, you want to come and hold the thing up? Make them hear it. Then I'm going to be able to hear it. Yeah, just hold it close.
An outraged mother and her 6-year-old daughter at a loss for words, still baffled at how the little girl ended up in handcuffs at school.
And now they want answers. Who's about Valley Martinez has this boy.
Good morning to you both. Her mom says that she was handcuffed after she stole candy from a desk to teach her a lesson. This morning, mom says sorry isn't enough. 6-year-old Madison shows us how she says the school security guard handcuffed her today after lunch.
They heard. They heard. Did you understand why he would put him? That's on you?
I guess there's somebody.
Oh, I got it.
Good morning. I'm sorry that technology would not allow you to hear this 6-year-old girl's story. Before I go into her story, I want to thank God for my presence here today. And I want to thank God for Dr. Warren and the staff who continuously work to make opportunities for us to exchange and have an agenda that we address and a journey that we must embrace if we're going to make things better for our children and each other. This is the 5th year of this intensive workshop. And each year we're blessed to be able to come together to focus on how can we help each other survive in this world, enduring institutional racism and white supremacy. I have to call it what it is. But there's another element to that, and that's the God element. The God element is a quest for humanism in spiritual transition. That's the order of business for all of us, even the children. A quest for humanism in spiritual transition. So we have to teach our children, in spite of the adversity, this is just a journey, and this is how you survive this part of the journey, but there's another side of this journey. And when you do that, you instill in faith and hope in children. Now, this little 6-year-old girl is 6 years old. That means she's learning, she's testing, she's developing values and character. So she has to be guided, she has to be nurtured, she has to be educated. But in this system that we live in, the quest for humanism is slowly disintegrating. I remember I was at church one day in Albany, Georgia, and the minister said, there's going to come a time that the Holy Spirit is going to leave this earth. And when the Holy Spirit started to leave this earth, I don't want to be here, because that's what governs me. And I see right now that the Holy Spirit is beginning to leave this earth. When a child 6 years old is having a teacher who's probably 25 or 30, not understand that she's testing her environment, she got a piece of candy. The God side of that in a teacher, the intellectual side of a teacher, the emotional side of a teacher would talk that through, counsel with that kid. Okay, that's the humanism. Okay, and not call the police and handcuff the baby. Okay, there's a psychological transition going on in the soul of folks who do that kind of stuff.
Yes, yes.
There's a quote. It's amazing, when I tried to do this story, to do this speech, I had a party. I had an emotional party myself, okay? So, because, we're spiritual beings too.
Yes, yes.
So, what I did, I come from the old school. I had to see what my folks saying about stuff. And I'm not being prejudiced here, but I had to see what black folks say about it. Because our survival is dependent on the extended family. So I had to go back and see what James Baldwin, and I I don't think I got my stuff here. I had to go back and see what Jane Baldwin and some other people would say about children. Okay? And so what I found was, one of the quotes that Baldwin said was, children have never been very good at listening to elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. Then when I thought about this teacher, he had another thought. Quote, a child cannot be taught by someone who despises him.
Come on.
So we talk about the prison, black child prison pipeline. If our teachers don't like our children, they put them on the train, they give them the ride. This little girl is experiencing trauma. That was a traumatic act for her. In the processing of that, what it does is it teaches emotional despair. You understand me? But she has a godly mother who will not let that challenge become psychologically a pathology for her. She became an advocate for her daughter, okay? And is gonna see her through, and is gonna sue, all right? So this girl learns from a little girl that she got to do what? She got to fight, okay? Oh, what Christian soldiers. Okay? All right. So then I got some more thoughts, right? I had to go back to my folks. And I went to Hank Aaron, okay? And Hank Aaron, in one of his quotes, said, a white child might need a role model, but a black child needs more than that.
Come on.
In this society, he needs hope. Then I had to go a step further. That was the emotional, spiritual side working with me. I had to go to Jesse Owens, okay? And I had to go see what Jesse Owens said about children. And this was a lesson that gave me the focus that we need to develop nationally for black children after I listened to his thought, his quote. He said, any black child who strives to achieve in this country should think in terms of not only himself, not any black person, that was not a child, that's any black person who strives to achieve in this country, should think in terms of not only himself, but also how he can reach down and grab another child and pull him to the top of the mountain where he is.
That's right.
So we had some folks in the extended family where I came from who reached down and pulled us to the top where they were. Okay? And that's a strength of the African American family.
Yeah.
We are lifters as we climb. I'm gonna tell you a story about a young lady who was my teacher and who influenced me to come to Tuskegee. See, she had climbed the mountain. She didn't just call me. She didn't call me in class. She took me to her house. She said, when you get out of school today, you come up to my house. I'm gonna help you fill out the application. Okay. So I went up there and we filled it out. And when I got ready to come to Tuskegee, before I was admitted, she brought me, her and her husband were both Tuskegee graduates. She brought me to Tuskegee. She walked me here. We got to empower our children by values that worked for African Americans when there was a village. We loved on our children, not just in words, we loved on our children in action. When I was a little girl growing up, if I did anything, everybody in the neighborhood knew it.
Come on, come on.
I remember one day my mother was whipping me, and I'm one of them high yellow girls, right? And well, that's what we call light-skinned people. So when my mother hit me, I got them red things all over me, okay? And so I went up the street, and my uncle was sitting up there. My uncle sitting up there, he was shelling, the pecans. He was a veteran, retired, disabled. And he said, I heard you whooping Carter this morning. I wasn't whipping her, she was whooping me, okay? And I'm gonna give you a story to show you in a deeper example of that. My high school, my first through the 9th grade principal was a preacher. And he was active in my church. And when a child, we had a school where he taught discipline and respect. On Fridays, the boys wore ties. We had chapel, so he was still in spirituality. There was one guy in the school who was classified as he would do devious things, okay? And we'll have in chapel one day, and this principal named Reverend Bryant. We call him Professor Bryant. This kid acted out during chapel. This is the truth. You can go to Abbeville and everybody will tell you she's telling the truth. He acted out during chapel. And when he did that, the principal called him my boy, said, you need to stop that. Well, he didn't pay him no attention. This principal got off of the stage and ran this boy through the community. And it was funny for me as a child to watch the professor running the student. He was the only one that he had to run because everybody else did what we were supposed to do. When I think about that, I didn't think about it in the context that I think about it. When a child, I was laughing. Look at him right behind Billy Harper, right? But when I became an adult,
all right.
But the old folks used to say, you'll understand it better by and by. Now I can look at the love that this black principal had for Billy Harper.
Yes.
Okay? So I saw in my village constant examples of people taking us to the mountaintop where they were. Okay? So that's what we got to do for our children. We got to, what's the word that means taking it back? Sephora? It's an African word. Sankofa. Okay, we got to enact Sankofa.
Yes.
Because that's what brought us.
That's right.
That's what brought us. And we can't say, we got to be proactive individually. We can't blame each other and say they ain't doing it. We got to love on a black child individually. Individually, we need a national movement called Love on a Black Child. And everybody pick out one and love on him.
Yes.
This lady who loved on me in 1964, I want you to hear me, I went to Harvard at 55. She used to call me up. Dorothy, what you doing? I said, I'm doing all right. Did you go to church, son? I'm 55, she 80 something. She's 90 something now. She said, Dorothy, did you go to church? I said, no, I didn't go. Well, you got to go to church. All right? That's a bond of love that comes from a village.
That's right.
Here I am at 55, my mother's dead, but here's a woman who God put in my life to mentor me for the rest of my life. Yeah. What a blessing.
Yeah.
That's the kind of love experience that we need to instill in our communities, because as long as we live in neo-colonialism, Jim Crow Jr.,
Come on.
white supremacy, social control, we're gonna have things that we're seeing now that is affecting our children, and we're gonna have to take more responsibility, and don't be in awe, because you know what it is. So we got to come up and step up to the plate, reinstitute the village, and empower our children one by one. That's what we got to do. I mean, nobody else is going to do that for us. We have to do it for ourselves. I'm going to give you another short story. And this story is related to social policy. It took me so long in school to understand social policy. It took me a long time because I was affected by social policy all of my life. Okay, I had a black school, didn't have no books, didn't have no cafeteria, and I believe I got asthma now because I inhaled smoke from coals all of my life. And they're talking about social policy, all right? But social policy is another form of, if it's not written correctly and enacted, it could destroy us and it could destroy our children. And that's what's happening in this country today.
Yes.
Social policy,
Yes.
zero tolerance.
Yes.
How in the world
Come on.
could you expect a child to have zero tolerance?
That's right.
You ain't even got zero tolerance. That's things we do.
Yes, come on.
But you got some folks sitting over there drawing $150,000 to write crazy policy like that. Okay? Then they come along and they say, don't you know what that means now? That's the prison pipeline. If I got zero policy, what I can do? I can take that child and lock him up, and then he become dismayed. He go into a juvenile center, and then he doesn't do well in there, and the next step is prison. Here's an example. In Abbeville, where I live, they have a policy in the elementary school that says if you get 3 infractions of inappropriate behavior, you will automatically go to the juvenile alternative school that they have on campus through the Board of Education. So somebody called me up and say, Doc, what you think about that? I said, that's insane. I said, that's insanity, okay? So it was just a casual conversation. About 5 or 6 months later, I have a cousin who has 2 children, and she called me up and she said, Doc, can you see Taiwan today? Now this is what I call backdoor counseling, extended family. I don't work for the Board of Education, okay? But I got a family, and I got an extended family. She's a part of my extended family. So I had to come out and use my social work skills for this hurting mother because the school system does not have a clinical social worker with mental health education and counseling to do therapy. So I said, well, what's wrong with Taiwan? She said, he an AB student, and he, by the way, I was going to bring him and his mother, but he broke his arm playing football. And she said, he's acted out. The teacher said he got 2 infractions, he got 1 more. He gonna have to go to juvenile, the alternative school. And I said, oh no, that won't happen. I say, bring him over to the house. And everybody know you gotta come to my back door. And white folks get upset. Cause you know, they used to make us come to the back door too, but they knock on the door. I said, come to the back door, okay? but anyway, let's get to Tyrone, okay? So Tyrone comes in, and I say, sit down, tell me what's going on, Tyrone. I hear you have 2 infractions here, you're gonna end up in juvenile alternative school. I said, what's the problem? He said, the teacher say I'm talking out. I said, well, you talking out? What's going on? Why are you talking out? He said, I'm not disrespecting her. He said, but I just, I put my hand up every time they ask the question because I know it. So I said, you are bored. You need a challenge. You need a teacher who knows how to challenge your intellect, your brain to stimulate it, because where they talk about, you already know, okay? I said, but what else is going on? He said, well, there's a lot of other stuff going on. I said, I tell you what, we don't talk enough today. Every time you come here, you're gonna have a chore. And then when you finish your chore, then you come back the next week. The next week he came back, long story short, he was having some mental health issues. The mental health issue was, his mother had married the second time. His father was the mother's first husband. So he didn't have the bond with his father no more with the divorce. And he was jealous of the little girl that the father had by his mother. Thirdly, he could not accept that his mother and father couldn't be married.
That's right.
So I had to go plow through that to hear his hurt and pain. And then he felt like the little girl by the father was getting more attention than he was. So I had to went, like layers. So we went through those layers of trauma that he was experiencing due to divorce. So I said, okay, what we gonna do now? We're gonna call in Daddy. We're gonna call in your mama. We're gonna talk about this. And I said to the mother when she came over, this is the problem. I got to the root of it. You got to let me talk to Eldridge and make sure that he's making this young man feel a part. Okay? So it happened. We had about 5 sessions. He had no more infractions. He's still an AB student. He didn't go to the alternative school. Now, had not he had mental health clinical intervention, he was getting ready to go to the alternative school. It is no telling what would have happened with him there. He might have been on that pipeline going to prison. But thank God that I was there, not as an official of the public school, but as a family member who had been trained to do social work. God has a way of providing what the system don't need. What the system don't do if you believe in him. He has a way of providing what the system don't want to do and ain't gonna do, but you have to have faith and understanding. And while I was talking and you was preaching, I was talking to myself. I was saying, my heart was saying, are we the Israelites? Let my people go. Okay? Let my people go. But in doing this presentation, I went back to some African American people by the name of Asa Hilliard. I went back to Neely Fuller. I went back to Francis Cressy Wellesley. Okay? And Henry Clark, Dr. Henry Clark. And I went back to Du Bois. You know I had to visit Booker T. I said, Jesus, I'm 70 years old and I still read Up from Slavery again because of the context on which this world operates.
That's right.
God has us placed in an environment of victimization, controlled by world dominance of white supremacy. And if you understand that dynamic, then you'll know that the only way you can survive that and take care of your children and your family, that you got to rely on yourself and God and the community, because the cards are stacked against you. Only if you let it happen. See, we come from a village where everybody took care of everybody. Yes. Everybody looked after everybody. Yes. Everybody helped everybody. I come from a community who, Miss Carter, you got any salt? Yeah. You got any sugar? That's right. And nobody said a word. How come she ain't got no money? She ain't got no salt. My daddy, I got mad with him. I didn't understand. He was a village man. Here I am, 50 years old, and my cousin told me, said, your daddy helped educate your cousin. I didn't understand it. I said, Daddy taking money from my ear. I didn't have the village concept. Then the old lady who got me to Tuskegee, she said, Doc, that's the way we did it. John had to help his nephew. He didn't take it all from your mama. See, that was a community of, we call Be Love, Be Action. They took charge and they prayed together, they stayed together. They loved one another, they helped one another.
Yes.
And that's what we got to do. I got examples of children. I brought 2. Little girl in Arizona. They don't know it was an altercation between her and another girl. This happened this week. The police grabbed the little girl, body slammed her. Latino girl. Okay? When you do children like that, that says something about the culture in which we're living. Why would you need police in a school?
Yes.
They're not trained to do anything with children. So they become abusive and they're brutalizing our children. And psychologically and emotionally, they are being damaged every day. So we got to come forth as a community and empower our children because of the obstacles that they are confronting because of systematic oppression and systemic racism. That ain't going nowhere. This is Jim Crow Jr. area. It ain't going nowhere.
Yes.
We got to do what the old folks did for us. My mama used to say, they can do anything they want to, but they can't take it out your head. And she made me come to Tuskegee. I had no choice. It was no other school in the world but Tuskegee. Okay? So we've got to take the positive steps to empower our children. We have genius among us. Smart, brilliant kids. Now, in doing this speech, I went on eBay and bought an album that I was going to do today. I was going to empower this little boy in front of you all. I had some gifts for him, and I was going to put up some money that I needed for myself for his education and tell him in front of y'all that he's compelled to come to Tuskegee. But I couldn't do it. And the record that I ordered is To Be Young, Gifted, and Black.
Yeah.
And I was going to serenade him with that at the end of the program.
All right.
Okay? Nina Simone. I had to go back to Nina. Okay? So I can't say no more. I had lots of other things to say. And I have a lot of literature that I read related to the black child school to prison pipeline. So because I'm getting younger, I couldn't get it all run off. So for those of you who want it, you can leave your name and address with me, and I'll run it off when I can get to the, I got a copy in my house, but I get tired, okay? I'll run off everything that I have that I've read about the black child to prison pipeline. One ending statement. I said, let me see what my folks saying. What is Obama saying about it? Okay, that's my folks. Right? So what I did is, I'm on the internet, I'm searching. What is Obama doing? Obama has done well.
Yes.
He's done very well.
Yes.
Thank God for Obama. He changed the laws relating to zero tolerance. He did initiatives relating to zero tolerance. He started a movement in this country called Boys, what is it? You all know what it is. It's about black boys. We are brother's keeper. That was a part of the initiative that was set up to be a variable that could to deteriorate, what is the word? You know what I'm talking about. You deter the school to prison pipeline.
Yes.
And then you see Sister Michelle, she did the same thing. When she talk about college, everybody going to college. So what we got to do is we got to institute a new pipeline. The pipeline, the school to vocational school to college pipeline. And then I got a clip from Obama. It was interesting. When you go to school to be a social worker, you have to learn how to do research. And I wasn't very good at the squares and all of that part of research, okay? But I could do research in other things, in other ways. So I got on, let me see what Obama's saying. I got the initiatives and all of that. I had a clip, and in this clip, he was interviewed by the commentator, and he said, the problem is the school to prison pipeline is racial biases. You know, he's so articulate, he didn't call it what I call institutional racism, the same thing. His language skills are better than mine. He said it's racially biased. Okay, same thing. Okay. So, if you go on Google, you can see what your president's saying. He's anti-white supremacy. Okay, and he's put it in action and he exposed it. And he said, we got to do something. He set something in motion to do it. So thank God for all of you all. And that's the end of my presentation.
I would like to thank the keynote speaker and both of our respondents. Now, I will open up the floor for questions and comments and statements.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I want to thank our presenters, excuse me, for your information. Dr. Head, 37 years ago, today, I became an alpha man. And our district vice president, about 34 years ago, called us a gang. And I think it's significant that we understand that. Children, I don't think there's enough information presented to parents nor to teachers and colleges that are being educated to teach. I taught for 20 years prior to 17 years of ministry about human growth and development. A lot of what young people do is actually recreation. I remember rolling tires out of the playground to the street, watch the tires hit cars. Did that for recreation. It's not that I was a bad kid, it was recreation. So somebody needs to help to shape behavior. I remember when my eldest son, who was 31, prior to him going to school, I remember I had a child with a parent, a student. I said to the parent, your son is interrupting my class. He said, but this is a white parent, we don't want to break his spirit. We want to shape his behavior. And as a young teacher then, I didn't understand it, but when my son went to middle school, and he got in some trouble with teachers, I said, we don't want to break his spirit. We want to shape his behavior. That's right. And as parents, we need to understand that fact that we want to shape behavior and not break their spirit. I wish I had shared this when the superintendent was here yesterday. In Baltimore, we know the exact time frame in which most youth crimes take place, between 3 and 6 p.m. Guess what? That's when recreation centers are supposed to be open. And they're closed. We have after-school programs, but as a teacher, having done them, I don't think that they are as successful as we think. Why? Number one, students have been in school all day long. Teachers have been in school all day long. And it's the teachers that are mostly doing the after-school programs, and as a result, they're tired. And children are just playing games and not being educated or helping with studies. They do homework as opposed to completing studies. Gentrification is an issue socially and emotionally. In Baltimore, Johns Hopkins Hospital has bought up the east side, University of Maryland on the west side. And I pastored a church in northeast Baltimore where education was high, crime was low. When people were largely displaced in that community, what happened was they moved several gangs into a small location. Guess what? Crime went up, violence went up, because of various gangs in the same community. I don't know if this is a study under guys just moving people to another location, but it has changed Baltimore. So you might want to consider that as you talk about my city in the wire. prescription drugs for ADHD and other challenges. It's a known fact that that they are in correlation and make children susceptible to street drugs. So we have to take a look at how our children are medically cared for by our doctors. Entitlement. As we have gone higher socioeconomically, sometimes our children think that they are supposed to have. I'm talking about what black parents are sharing with black children, and I think we need to be careful in that regard. Of the Frankenstein theory, of what we create in the basement, we're going to deal with upstairs. We do need that village. We do need the extended family and parents. And lastly, I wish I shared this when the superintendent was here. We can't get off from work and get paid for jury duty and funerals. But many parents can't take a day off from work. They have to decide, will I go to work and be paid, or I want to see about my child? Wouldn't it be great if 4 times a year, once a grading period, if parents would come to a school and volunteer or just watch their children go through a school day and then have a slip sign and take it to work and be paid for the day? We need to be very creative in the ways in which we engage our children and support our children and take a look at society as a whole, and along with what we have talked about today, this week, and what we're actually doing in our communities.
In brief response to that, and along with the war on drugs during the Reagan era, part of what happened during that time period was he also defunded cities and state federal support, which also created the groundwork for gentrification, not just in Baltimore, but in most of the urban centers. And when you had those urban centers that no longer had resources for schools, for community outreach centers, for those things that would give children safe places to be during those hours. Yes, you had those proliferation of crimes in certain areas, but also what happened was the black middle class moved. We did.
In Baltimore, I grew up and pastored in the Sacktown community where the Freddie Gray issue, matter of fact, the celebration of the first anniversary of his incarceration is today. In that community, there used to be professionals, business people,
that's right,
domestics, neighborhood wino. Now, that was the first urban renewal, or sometimes we call Negro removal community in America. And most of those homes have been boarded up for 45 years now. The government and the state is putting, and even from DC is sending money, they call it Sandtown, but it's all Baltimore. Baltimore City in that community, $12.7 million a year to incarcerate in a 6-mile radius community. And this is something that might need to be considered school systems nationwide. And at the elementary school, they've had 5 principals in 5 years. So we're talking about the stabilization of education.
Absolutely.
Within a particular district. So those kind of things, if they're not being looked at, we also need to take a look at within our cities and urban areas, our rural areas.
Absolutely, and again, it's the interaction of all these systems together that creates, if you will, a perfect storm for these urban communities when you have federal programs that have been pulled out that support the schools and the government systems to have the kind of things that will keep the community stable leave, but then they send that money back through the private industry and give them subsidies to actually build new condos for the people that were actually there and cannot afford. That is gentrification. And it's all supported by federal legislation and federal dollars.
One of the things that I want to respond to as far as my brother and what he said was that we, the community, needs to understand the need for brothers like him to be put into positions whereby we can make change, whereby we can do things, where we can make some of these things happen. It's not a part of just talking about it and saying it. We've got to take some action. We've got to make things change. We've got to get in there and make sure that the money that is spent for what we need to do as far as that's concerned, and not necessarily what has been going on or what has been spent for. That's why I'm a active believer that the church has to do more than just preach the gospel. The church has to motivate you in order to understand and to give you knowledge and to give you wisdom, which is the gospel, to realize where we are and what we're doing. So when we have a brother who stands up and gives us a lot of things that needs to happen, you know, he said Baltimore, but he's really talking about all our communities. You know, because when he talked about the boarded up houses and the businesses that's closed, those of us who are from Macon County can identify with that wholeheartedly as far as that's concerned, where money is being spent for everything else. The only issue, my brother, is, you know, the fraternal choice. We will, however, pray for you much. Amen. I'm just kidding. You know how we do. You know how we do.
I'd like to thank the panel for the information. My name is Clinton Jackson. I'm a minister from here in Indiana. I'm also a descendant. But what I've noticed is that corporations are now in our city taking over the charter schools. Corporations run the prison. We're trying to, many people are trying to elect a corporation head as president. What is the effect of corporations on this child to school to prison?
Excellent question, because it comes down to what makes most sense in this country, economics. And when you privatize and corporatize the prison system, when they get paid by the head, they're going to create systems to put more bodies in the prison. Same thing in charter systems. The charter system that I was talking to you about earlier, that is actually in Philadelphia and Camden and Philadelphia, New Jersey, is the Mastery Charter School. They have over 21 schools, over 12,000 students that are being subjected to the oppression. That's the only other way. And here's the thing, they're not gonna send them to an alternative school because they don't get money. They put them in prison in that school by sending them, not giving them liberties.
That's right.
And that's how they keep the money there and they keep them oppressed. So it is sad to say that it is because of the privatization of schooling as well as the prison system, it is two systems that are feeding each other's economic desire. And that's truly what it's about.
Yeah.
Also, I have an article that's related to that on the charter school, that there is an extremely high suspension rate of black children in charter schools now. And so that's corporate America. Okay?
But even with the schools that are doing suspensions are usually not the ones that are more community-based, but the ones that are privately owned by corporations like Camden that have these whole systems, they're never gonna suspend a child outside of their system. If they get suspended, it'll be in another part of their system, so they keep those dollars. Because just like the prison, it's a per capita allotment by the county for those kids in that school.
I'd like to ask a question about school system. I know politicians that was involved in a lot of the things that happen in the school system, what makes a lot of kids so ill today. Number one, they took pride in school. That's number one issue. Number two, stop the families from chastising the kids. How can we get that back so we can handle our kids in a way like when we was brought up? We got chastised and we had prayer in school.
They legislate to take prayer out of the school. I'm a component of the fact that prayer is not out of the school. We've got to teach our kids how to pray anyway. You know, we got to teach our kids that praying is not a display. It's a private conversation with God that you can do at any time, in any place, anywhere you want to go. And that can't be legislated. That has to be taught to our kids that prayer is your godly gift that has been given to you, and don't let anybody take it away from you. As far as chastising is concerned, I think, again, they have legislated to make sure, and one of the reasons I believe that they've done this is to make sure that we don't chastise their kids, that we don't call out their kids, that we don't talk about their kids, okay? But I'm concerned about my kid. I'm concerned about making sure that my kid is being all that he or she can be. So I've got to focus in on my child. Now, I don't want to make a public display of chastising my child, but my child is going to understand that if you do what is not acceptable as far as we're concerned, then you're going to be chastised. Now, you know, the funny thing about chastisement is that Daddy didn't have to open his mouth. He could look at me and I could understand exactly what he was saying. And during that time, I was fearing that bell ringing when we had to go home. You know, so it wasn't that he came to the school and chastised me publicly, but he came to me with a presence that allowed me to understand, homeboy, you in trouble. We gonna deal with this, you know, as far as that's concerned. So immediately I began to understand, because I was brought up in an era whereby, you know, when Daddy pulled in the driveway, we sometimes had to play like we were asleep because we didn't want that chastisement to come down on us. I think, again, addressing that whole thing of chastisement, it involves parenting. It involves helping people to understand the responsibility of parenting. And again, there's no book, there's no, nothing that can make you be a parent other than understanding the responsibility that you have, that God has given you to bring up your child, to make sure that your child gets all that they need. And they will not, shall not, cannot take that child away from me. You know, I'm going to make sure that that child understands that's what we got to do. And I'm going to pray that God gives us the strength to continue to do that, because we do need to not let those traditions go. You know, we talk about letting go of traditions, but that tradition we need to get back. And the tradition of a village raising a child instead of, you know, because right now we don't seem to care about what's going on with the other kids, and I think that's a learned behavior. What we've got to do is understand we don't have time for that.
I understand what you're saying about that, but we still have prayer in school, but we learn it at home. But kids today, if they can learn it at home, when they get to school, you don't have it at school. It's a problem. So that they know this is what they're supposed to do.
Okay. And again,
That's what you're supposed to do.
And again, I will not, cannot, shall not accept the fact that in order to know how to pray, they've got to do it at school. I mean, they got to teach it at school. What I'm saying is that it needs to be taught in other places, but we need to teach it to help them to understand. The school might not do it. You know, you might not even do it when you're playing sports as far as that's concerned. But if a child understands that I can be protected by praying, I can be covered by praying, if they understand that, it doesn't matter where they are and what they're doing. I mean, you know, there's a lot of places that you could say prayer is not taught, but there's one place that I know that it can be taught, and that's from those of us who pray. Those of us who share prayer and understand prayer.
Let me say something.
Okay.
I saw a video that was done in Tuskegee in the last month. And I don't know the name of the organization. I think it's Safe Haven that's doing it.
Yes.
They're doing involving children
Yes.
and teaching them how to survive in a system where there's I have a sensitivity. It's a police state now. It's a police state in America, okay? And it was the most beautiful thing that this little black boy said. He said, they asked him a question. What can you do if the police stop you? And the police is nasty and abusive to you. He said, I can pray. He's already using the weapon. Okay? And power of prayer is brought us where we are today. So we got to keep on teaching our children. If the law say don't pray, you can pray anyway. Okay, nobody stop you from praying.
That's right.
Okay?
That's right. And Ms. Baker brings up an excellent point, because you got to understand, it might not be in the school, but we've got components going on all over the community. Youth Safe Haven that she just talked about. We sponsor a chat and chew for teenagers right here in the Macon County community. There's the Youth Hope Builders program that is initiated by Dr. Wilson and the Bioethics Center. We are working in the Bioethics Center to do a Youth Bridge Builders program that is going to help kids and us to mentor those kids to walk with them. So those challenges that they're having as far as to not understanding that the school system says they can't pray, don't let them hold on to that. Teach them that you can. You know, Obama said, they say I can't, but I can, and I can. Okay? So we got to keep on going.
My name is Ann Benson. I'm on faculty here at Tuskegee University, and I would like to thank all of the panelists, my sister. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story about your family with us. And just a few comments. Discipline and parenting starts in the home, okay? And we all have a responsibility to raise our children. And we have to stop accepting. You can't tell my child what to do. We have to get away from that.
Yes.
We have to stop that. And I grew up in Tuskegee, and I grew up in an environment where we played as children. But everyone in the neighborhood knew us. They knew who our parents were. And it was nothing for someone else's parent to pick up the phone and call our parent and say, I saw your child down the street. This is what they were doing. But now you can't do that. And even in the college environment, my brother brought up entitlement. As parents, even high school and college students, if your child is not entitled to anything. Our children are not entitled to that A, that B, that new car, that whatever. They have to be taught that they have to make responsible decisions. And when they don't, there are consequences for those decisions. Okay, another concern that I have is, what is building more prisons do? Prisons are being built for our children. Our children. Plain and simple. And in terms of the pipeline to prison, let us not forget our children. because girls and women are being incarcerated at alarming numbers.
Yes, yes.
I would like to thank you all for participating in this session, and I apologize if I wasn't able to get all of y'all's questions. We're really short on time. And that will be the end of the session.